All right. So this is the first unorganized discussion for Tiny Stars. Our topic today is going to be play culture and consent, and we've got some lovely friends who are going to talk about it. I'm going to go ahead and introduce us in case this community grows and people find these later, but these are going to be stored mostly internally in the Tiny Stars community. But hi, I'm Kurt. I use he/him pronouns, and I'm pretty excited about this topic. I'm going to pass it off. That way it's easier for people. So, Ben, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Ben, and I use he/him pronouns. Barry.
Hi, everybody. I'm Barry. I use he/him. I saw Kurt I think it was you that posted this like initially, or maybe Pauper. I can't remember, and I don't have the chat in front of me. But I was excited about it because, like, I'm just coming off of a run of a couple of different games that have like some potentially thorny consent issues like baked into one of the playbooks, and like there are a lot of those in the story game world, but I had one in particular that I felt like I had a lot of like upfront work to do about it, and so I'm curious about, I don't know, I'm curious about a lot of things. And I'm going to go to Philip Popper.
Hi, I'm Philip. He/him pronouns. Yeah, I wanted to join on this because I think that safety and consent and healthy play culture are important to everyone, and looking forward to learning here. Sarah?
Me. Sarah, she, her. And yeah, like how to do these things better.
Awesome. So we've got some topics here, but I'll kind of kick into one of them, and then we can sort of flow as the conversation goes. So I'm curious. The first one here is: can gaming really be safety versus coping? And Philip, I'd love to hear more about what you meant by that, because I'm not sure what you meant by safety versus coping.
Yeah, I can't remember where I saw it, but I was like reading something where it was like it's impossible um to like play games in the hobby like on like an ongoing basis and not have a safety issue. Like it's going to happen. So it's sort of like the tools and everything that we bring to the table, are they about making the game safe so much as coping with it when it becomes unsafe? So like sort of going in knowing that you are going to have problems and you have to like step up to sort of fix those problems when they happen, versus like this idea that we can have safe gaming and maybe like I think there might be like sort of like a shame culture around moments that become like unsafe. And that's just like my surface level thoughts. I don't have anything more than that.
That's actually really interesting that especially the shame part, right? Because I think you're right that there's always, I mean, that's the whole point of the X card, is that there are always going to be times when we stumble into someone's trauma that we didn't expect. And the whole point of that tool for me seems to be a way for that person to address that trauma, or pause the scene so that we can get away from that content as quickly as possible and as seamlessly as possible. And part of one of the reasons why I like using the X card for all sorts of things, just so it's not just a trauma button. It can be a, hey, I don't like we're off tone, or other reasons, right? But I definitely think that that's true, that you're always there's no way to make it perfectly safe, right? We don't have perfect information about everyone's life experience at the table, especially when playing with strangers. And I'd actually love to hear more about how everyone feels about this shame culture thing, because I think you're right that it's common for people to come away with bad feelings if there is a moment where we hit someone's trauma, because it's not always easy to handle it, especially if the person is having trouble stepping forward to actually X content that may not have been obviously hurting them in some way. And so how can we, what are ways that we can sort of make it easier on the table so that it doesn't, no one comes away with bad feelings when someone does have to X something for trauma purposes or something like that?
I think a lot of it has to do with preparing the group for these moments rather than trying to freestyle it, when it comes up, and hoping that everybody is well prepared and has the right mindset. Like for me, whenever I have the safety discussion at the start of the session, like I don't just talk about the tools, I also talk about the mentality. And I think the most important tool that we can all use is being observant and empathetic towards the other players, and not focusing so much on our own experience that we kind of miss when somebody else is having a hard time. And I think when we're kind of paying attention to other people's feelings a little bit closer, then it can be easier to, this is kind of a preventative thing. Like you can stop things before they get too far and really like go deep on somebody's traumatic experience. But if people are already kind of paying attention, then it's much easier. You're already in the mindset to help somebody, asking them the right questions. Like, oh, this person, they don't, they haven't talked in a while. They have a look on their face. I'll ask them a question like, should we slow down for a minute, or maybe we should stop and take a break now, or how are you doing? Is there anything I can do for you? Those kinds of questions immediately put that person in a better place, I think. So talking about it at the start of the game, I think, is a huge step forward.
Cool. Anybody? That makes sense, right? That you would want to just sort of encourage focusing on paying attention to the other players at the table if they're showing discomfort. I was listening to, I think it was Pandas Talking Games, and they were talking about the different ways that you can sort of try to gauge people, how people are doing it at the table. And one of them is, trying to body language, right? Like read expressions. Are people retreating from the table? Are they looking visibly uncomfortable? Something I've always been a little wary about is trying to come to people's aid too quickly, because it may not be, like, I may be misreading it, right? And so I try to lean on the tools a little bit, but so that people can call for help when they need it. Because I don't want to stop the game every time I misread someone's facial expression. And so I wonder how we can, I don't know if there's a right way to fix that, other than just, practicing empathy and trying to, get better at reading body language.
I'm going to talk about nonverbal check-in in a second, but I also want to recognize Gene's here. Gene, do you want to say hi to everybody?
Yeah,
or
Gene.
anybody? Or just me? You can just say hi to me also.
Oh, good morning. I'm not a West Coast morning person, and it's a little overcast here, so it seems even earlier. So, morning.
Morning, Gene. So I was in a couple of games at Big Bad Con. I LARPed for the first time, and I was really interested in the use of gestural check-in. And I know that that's not something that is easily translated to the online space that we all play in. But there were a couple of times where because it was LARP, and part of this is inexperience, part of this is trying to live up to the standard that I think that is set by a lot of people at Big Bad Con. I wanted to use those those check-ins. And so I've seen the sideways thumb as an interrogative that someone can respond to with a a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or kind of a wavy gravy for whether it would be a good time, whether they're into what's happening and want it to continue, whether it is not necessarily awesome, or whether they really need to need to pause and might need assistance in doing so. And I haven't felt like I've found quite the way for that to work in the online context. I've done a little bit with like it's one thing to like have the out loud verbal like pause and like unpack a moment, which is something that I had to do in a game fairly recently, primarily for the sake of like we weren't in a situation that we had talked about in our lines and veils, but I wanted to make sure that everyone was like was on board with where things were going. And so like that was something that like we did kind of like pause the game. But like I've had other situations where I've wanted to be able to have that like that direct one-to-one conversation, and like in things like Zoom or Slack or whatever, I guess it's like a thing to be able to send a message to one person on the thing that you're on. But also that's just like it's a lot of inboxes to check in terms of like I'm speaking and having the game conversation, but then also and then also we have the game chat probably, and then also we have like separate things. And so yeah, that's something that I'm not quite sure about how to do yet, but I'm really interested in whether I'm really interested in like physical gesture and how that can translate to online. So I introduced a tool for a game that I ran last night. We didn't bring it to bear, and it's but I blame myself for only having like an hour of play last night. So I don't know. I'm talking a lot. What I'm going to boil it down to is that in the online context, I lose a lot of the body language that is necessary. And so like being explicit about like I'm going to do these things in order to check in on myself, my players, and the table. Like to speak to what Ben was saying, like preparing the table for that is, I think, a necessary thing. And to answer like to last thing, and then I will shut off my microphone. Can it be safe? Can gaming be safe? I don't think so, but it can be safer, like seatbelts. Muting.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting trying to translate that to online gaming, right? And building tools that work a little better for online, because you're right, like private messaging someone while you're GMing is almost impossible. At least for me, like I am not going to be able to pay attention to someone speaking and be able to type in the chat at the same time. But maybe there's a way to say, just in the general chat, throw up a phrase, right? Or something that's, macroed that you can click and say, check in, right? And then that gives everyone the opportunity to send you a thumbs up, thumbs down privately, or that way, if you need to, you could pause that way. But I don't know, that'd be tough, right? Because if the person is already a little concerned about speaking out and you say check in publicly, and then everyone's going to know someone said no, right? So maybe that's not like the way to do it. I'd be interested to find it though.
Okay, I'm super late on this because you probably already covered it, but let me ask you this, or anyone here. Have you ever had a consent problem at your table and it became like a deal, like a real thing? I mean, it's always a real thing, but have you ever had like a consent issue or safety issue occur and everything stopped? Because it's happened to me twice, and I was the GM both times.
Yeah.
So it's a thing. It is really a thing. I mean, I have so many things to unpack about it, but in both cases, it took me a reasonable amount of time to really understand that there was a system issue, not necessarily an issue with me, because clearly no one goes into any session thinking they want to cause harm, allow harm to happen, or even they just don't want it for whatever reason. But when it happens, it's a system breakdown or something you don't see. It's like it's like a car accident. But in one case, it wasn't actually both cases were online. But in one case, there was a time constraint on the session, and I said we had to hard frame pass some stuff, and because of that, I had to hard frame like a ton of stuff right in the middle, and I didn't check in with every single person about the scenes we were hard framing, and someone later said I really had an issue with that, and I had to really unpack it, and so the next session was all about consent and safety. So it worked out in the long run, but still, it was not what I wanted to see. Then the other time it happened, and keep in mind these are only times that I was aware of it. It's probably happened in so many times. You know what I mean? Because I played thousands of sessions. But the other time it happened was um, we were playing a game, and one of the players proposed something and didn't clear it with another person. And then, but the session went fine. Like I went away thinking everything was okay. And it was only after, like maybe a day after, that one of the players said, "Hey, I had a real problem with this," upon thinking. So it wasn't happening during the game. It happened after they thought about it for a while. So this was this year. It just so happened I went to Origin, and it kind of ruined my convention for me because the entire time I was thinking about it. So yeah, that was a drag, and that was also a system thing. That was a thing where you're trying to give all the players agency, and there's a lot of responsibility with that, especially in terms of check-in. And there wasn't a good check-in at the critical moment, and it triggered something for another player, and it took them a while to unpack it, like a full day. Um, and it was a drag. So uh, the next session was a talk all about safety and consent again, and I wasn't wild about it, but it absolutely had to happen. In both cases, it didn't turn out to be an issue with the players because I since played with both players after that, and we had long talks about it. But um, my takeaway from it is that I consider myself a reasonably conscientious GM. I mean, I'm not a Jim Crocker, but I definitely cover all the bases. But no matter who you are, these kind of things just happen because you can't control every player, and you can't understand every nuance of their experience. Um, but I am less smug out of it. That's for sure. Like I don't assume that because Kurt is awesome and Barry's awesome that they're just gonna figure it out. I have to go over every single thing every single time because you never know. So anyway, that's my thing.
Yeah, and it's normalizing it too, isn't it? And making it feel like making the players and you feel comfortable making use of these tools. Because if you kind of gloss over them, second session, everyone knows what they're doing, it kind of falls to the back of your mind and become less aware, I think, of your options. But yeah, like it becomes coping when you're unprepared for it, I think.
I absolutely believe too that it happens in some ways. It happens more online, it happens less online. Like if we're in person, you can tell if John is feeling uncomfortable, you could kind of just tell. But at the same time, I think that people, when they experience there's discomfort, they sometimes they're not gonna say it immediately. I mean, that one thing where that person cooked for a little while, um, yeah, it's so hard to do sometimes. The only thing you could do is to be super conscientious about it. Sarah, you're right. You do have to normalize it. Um, but I think it's harder online for sure. The other thing too, and I'm even doing right now, is that sometimes you're not watching every screen at every single moment. Like that's just the nature of an online thing. Whether one screen pops up for you, and you're just seeing the one person. So I'm seeing like the Brady Bunch view right now, but where you have a chat program and you get Ben while Ben's talking, and you don't see how Kurt's responding what Ben's saying. And you miss that. In person, you're not going to miss that as easily. So yeah, I feel like I brought everyone down, but hey.
No, I don't think you brought us down. I mean, that's definitely something I haven't had that experience yet. What's that, Barry?
I'm just knocking my laptop. I was doing a physical gesture, and then I was checking in for myself.
Yeah, that's what was I going to say? I haven't had that happen at my table, but I have had to X stuff. We've had things get X'd. But yeah, I think you're right. Is something I do at the top of my games, because I know I'm not going to be able to look at all the screens. Just the way my attention works, I kind of hyper focus, and so I'll always ask the whole table to help me. And if anyone sees anyone having discomfort, or if anyone notices something getting X'd and I miss it, please come to my aid, and try to help us manage that. And so I don't know if it's maybe something where the whole table can participate, and it's not all on the GM, because there is a lot to try to focus on. You're trying to pay attention to what they're saying. You're trying to think of what's going to have to happen next. What's, are the rules being engaged in the game? And I think a lot of times you have a full group of 5 people that could be paying attention to how everyone's feeling. And I don't want to obviously I'm not suggesting that people should be policing, but I think everyone could do the work of gauging people's expressions, right? If you're not in a scene, you could be, you could be panning the Brady Bunch to make sure everyone's, good and having a good time. And maybe that's something that should sort of be built in there, or it's something that you could ask of the table. I don't know that it's too much to ask. As primarily a GM, I don't feel like it's too much to ask, but how does everyone else feel about sort of decentralizing the job of managing everyone, making sure everyone's having a good time?
Thinking about check-ins that I've gotten from people before things have happened, it's always been from other players, which is interesting. And I think because it's other players too, it doesn't require pausing the game, because you can kind of do it in your side channel or in whispers in the chat. And that's, I think, I don't know if more helpful, but it's allowed me to talk a little bit about the thing and then move on without stopping everything, which I've liked.
So you
Because
have.
it doesn't always need to
I'm
stop
sorry.
thinking. It's not always a trauma thing. It's just are you having a good time? Do you want to move this in another direction? Do we want to try to set up a scene in a next chance we get? Because we haven't, you haven't been talking for 20 minutes,
I think an interesting point there is in thinking about the idea of being a fan of the other players. And a lot of people often get really caught up in thinking about okay, what am I going to do next? What do I want to say? Where do I want to see this game go? But I think I've always found it really beneficial to be trying to be as concerned with what other people are bringing to the table and what other people are thinking about. That's just a general storytelling thing, but I think it is really appropriate for the conversation, because if you're as concerned with other people, then there's a lot more chance of you paying attention when someone hasn't been talking for a long time and maybe something's going on with them. So I think that's not just a GM thing, be a fan of the players. It should be a player thing as well. Be a fan of the other players and be as concerned for the other players as you are for yourself.
Yeah, Barry dropped something in the chat as comfort fun as a separate thing from trauma, but like the worst failures that I've had have been very much tied up in comfort and fun. So
Yeah, I don't mean to say that one of those is fundamentally like more or less important. One is like being able to like meaningfully work with traumatic or traumatizing content or people, traumatized people who are people suffering trauma, people experiencing trauma. There we go. Like that is a like a necessary step to be able to get to comfort and fun, but also like I'm thinking like hierarchy. Like you can't have fun unless people are comfortable. You can't be comfortable unless people feel like uh uh unless people have like a reasonable like feeling of safety. I'm gonna butt out again for a second. I just wanted to like that's just kind of where I was thinking with that I said.
yeah, because I think there's kind of an idea in my mind that the X card was meant to remove like concrete things when it can be a lot more complicated than that, like agency. How do you that I think requires more of a conversation. Like it's not just a thing you can remove or add in. It requires more intent and purpose. Thoughts?
I mean, I think on one side it is like Gene was saying, it can often be like a system issue with agency, but I do also feel like you can learn to GM if you're GMing, if that's what we're talking about, and in ways that are like more enabling of agency. But I have also seen like players take agency from each other before, so it's not like this is just a GM thing either. Um, but yeah, I definitely feel like there are like certain um, situations in which it's going to require like a conversation, and I don't think it's always necessarily even just like a safety issue. It may be like it may be like, I'm not enjoying this kind of thing, right? Like it could be like there could be different contexts in which this is happening. um and yeah, I think that we definitely need more tools and resources for how to have like conversations in the middle of play. Like what kind of structure can these conversations have? How do we keep these conversations from like derailing what we're doing, unless we need to? Again, like I feel like there's also this like thing that is sometimes forgotten, is that sometimes it's better not to return to the game. Like sometimes you have to just learn something and come back next time. And I mean, like even then, I don't feel like it's even necessarily that you have to get any sort of value out of like a safety stop. Like sometimes like the safety stop is something that needed to happen, and it may not have been you know like imparting of any sort of knowledge. It might have just been like, okay, we're just stopping for safety and that's it. um yeah, I think these are like conversations that we sort of have. We say things like the player is more important than the game, um but I don't think people necessarily consider like the full implication of that, I guess. Yeah.
Something that I'd love to talk about is kind of taking a step back from what we're talking about right now and actually asking the question, not just can gaming really be safe, but do we expect gaming to be safe? And I'd love to know what you all think, because I don't think that gaming can or should be safe. I think a lot of us play these games because they can be really close to things in real life. They help us explore things that we don't really understand about ourselves. Like, it's so complex. I think, how can you expect it to be safe, when it has all the complexity of like interhuman relations and conversations and life and all of this stuff? It's so complicated. So I'm curious, like, do you all expect these games to be safe?
I don't think I do at all. In fact, I often, like my design work, I think starts in somewhat of a challenging. It starts on somewhat of a challenging level, and then I try to like encourage like safety tools to bring it where you need it to be. Um, but I definitely think that like there's some other points that are related to this, like like for like making space for playing out certain kinds of things, playing certain games. um how do you do that? How do you like broadcast the intent or pitch that kind of stuff? Like how does that go wrong sometimes? Like I definitely think that I've I've definitely been in games where it was like, oh, we're just going to lean on the X card. And it was maybe like running towards the X card rather than like trying to cooperate and collaborate on a story. It was just like one person running towards the X card and seeing what they can get away with. Yeah.
I'll answer Ben's question a little bit, I think. I come to games as texts, like expecting that there are going to be things that are unsafe for some people to engage with. And so I really think that like one of the necessary things that someone that is enthusiastic about playing a game or running a game is like figuring out like what the right way to engage with that game at with the group of people that they want to play it with is going to be. Like in my case, uh the first time I got to play Monster Hearts was like online with people, and I started playing games online like a little over a year ago. um I've been playing with like the same face-to-face group for like the last 8 years. I've pitched it a couple of times. It's never been the right fit. And I think that would be the case like um with or without safety tools of any sort. It's maybe in the unfun rather than unsafe situation. But like even so, like playing games like Monster Hearts or what have you, like I think it's really necessary for each table to figure out like how is it like I ran a game of Monster Hearts last night. I had like a set of ideas in mind about like here is what I think is probably going to be useful for me for the group of players that I am playing with that I already know to some degree or another. But like I linked that PH Lee document in the thing, and Lee says in that like some tools straight up don't work for them. Like the engagement of tool is itself a safety issue. So I mean like it's I have the expectation that things are going to be that things are going to be unsafe somewhere along the line, and so I have the obligation to figure out how I can make things safer. That's my answer.
I think I've never expected games to be safe, I don't think, but I've tried to come at them with the expectation that we are going to adjust based on the needs of the table. Personally, I'm a lot more uh, I have a lot less trauma, I think, than, or my trauma doesn't tend to come up during games. That's the way I should say that. And so I have not had to X things because of like, I've never been triggered at a table. And so I don't have that experience of what that could be like. And so I tend to try to make sure that if someone says that they're having an issue, like I can't empathize, but I can sympathize, right? And so I try to make sure that anytime someone says that something shouldn't come up in this game, that it absolutely will not, because I have no frame of reference for when that could happen. And so even though I don't tend to take my own safety into consideration when I come into games, I'm very concerned about the safety of everyone else at the table. And so I don't know that games need to necessarily be written to be safe, but I feel like the attitude of the players should be that we are going to make this a safe place. That's kind of where I live.
That's something I'd like to come back to, the inherent or written in safety of games. First, though, I think like I personally can get through like a lot of things. Like some things are safe and some things aren't. Like murdering someone, that's fine. But I expect games, or would like games, never to have a failure of safety, if that makes sense.
I mean, that makes sense to me, right? That you would expect that the table would take care of everyone else at the table should there be an issue. Is that what you're saying? Or
Yeah, I mean, and like you can explore fraught topics. I think that is fine, and that doesn't make a game inherently unsafe to me. Just like don't go over the tipping point,
Like, I don't know who said this, but someone, maybe it was Adam Koval or something, like, don't be a dick, like, as his advice for the table. And I think it was in regards to, like, I don't think it was regards to safety. I think it was regards to, like, just the way you're playing or something. But there is a player responsibility part to it. Like, not necessarily player, because I don't think games are necessary. I don't think the player role is always necessarily an explicit thing in certain games. But just like if you're coming to a table with people, like, I think there's this idea that everyone is here trying to, like enjoy the experience or whatever, and that like we're all like peers and equals coming to this table, and that we should like accommodate each other, and give each other like affordances so that they can get at least as much out of this as we can, right? So yeah, I'm totally with you, Sarah, on this. Like I feel like yeah, like we can all kind of, like, it should be like part of coming to a table. Like it's definitely, I feel like it should be like a thing, like a normal thing, and that probably does need like normalizing, which I think a lot of people are trying to do. But I also think that a lot of people don't consider it as part of sitting down at a table, that they're going to have some responsibility. Yeah.
And I think that like this is something that we should have outside of games too. Like this is one of the things that I love about role-playing games, is that they teach us to be better in general. And if we approach all our relationships with the same attitude of not being a dick, is kind of the bare minimum. But if we're also trying to make sure that everyone, has what they need and is okay, and paying attention to people, like that's just like being a good person, being a person that other people are going to want to be around and stuff. And I think it's pretty fundamental.
I think you should, at least not you, but I think for me, one of the big lessons for all the things that I've done this year is that you can do everything absolutely right and still have an issue occur. I mean, you could do everything right. You have a great table. You could have people really well or reasonably well, and you can still have the issues. I mean, it could just happen. And um, in a way, it's probably helped me in the long run to have had issues in the past year, because now I understand how they work, at least for me, and how to deal with them and how to spot them in the moment. Um, but yeah, it's one of those really inexplicable things, at least for me, that you can have all these tools, you can have a great table, great game, and still it will, still something could occur. Um, yeah, I don't know. There's also this thing too about like in the one case, why did the player wait a day? Sometimes it takes a while. What you can't do anything in the moment. You're kind of relying on them, um, because that player is so good and so used to having their agency taken or being in those moments that I think what happens, that person kind of repressed the feeling, or kind of said, I'm just going to go with the party because I don't want to be the person who breaks the party flow, right? So it took a while for it to cook, and then it came up. So, um, every situation is a little different, and uh, it the ones where the people don't say anything are the hardest, because the players are so good now. The people that we play with are so good that sometimes they will just lump it. They'll just take it, and that bums me out even more so than the times that it does occur, that someone had to eat it because they didn't want to bring it up. So, what Sarah said earlier about making it normal, um, I think that's the way that I need to approach it, at least for myself, is to make that environment of safety so part of the thing that it just happens. So I don't know. I'm still kind of figuring it out on a session by session thing. But yeah, it's an interesting time when it does occur.
That actually, so that made me think of something that I'm interested in doing as kind of a habit, and that's the of course, we're like a lot of us spent some time in the gauntlet, and we have different semi-normalized patterns of debrief, we'll often do stars and wishes kind of things, but then I'm accustomed to is having the game is the game, and the stuff that happens at the game happens at the game, and then there's a break between then and the next game, and then the next game starts, and or the next session or whatever starts, and it's a new thing. And one of the things that I haven't had the experience of is kind of like that midpoint check-in of hey, now that we've got a little bit of space, how are folks feeling about that, which is funny to me because I've had that, I've held that space for myself. I played in a one-shot game last year, this year, where last year, I don't know, but I played in a one-shot game, and it was a little bit after the game that I realized I'm actually not thrilled about how that went. And so I had a conversation with the other player about it, and what we ended up doing was actually we used the tools that we've learned about to actually we rescheduled a thing, we got back together, we played out that thing, and that changed, that fundamentally changed my memory of and experience of that game. This is not something that's always going to be possible and feasible from a scheduling standpoint or whatever. But I don't know, I held that space for myself, and addressed it with the other player. And that's something that's something that I could have learned from. So I'm going to say it now. I'm going to say it out loud. The, if we're talking play culture as it intersects with this stuff, I think that having that processing time, more than hey, let's take 5 minutes off camera and then come back and have a debrief, because it's still it's the weight of it is still potentially right there, safety issue or not. There's still that go along, get along pressure. So I'm just saying this. I'm saying things.
Well, I mean, there's definitely been, I mean, that pressure. I think it's kind of just related to, like trying to help people have like, just like the shame thing that was brought up earlier. Like, I think that like these pressures and shames that we have are kind of just tied up in, like, do we have like a healthy relationship with safety tools, and do we do we um do we sort of advocate for this approach for gaming enough? Like, do we I think that there's sort of like this um this isn't just a gaming thing, like, for sure. Like, it's also just like a life thing. Like, people don't want to, like, be like, I'm sure like the harshest light about it would be like a buzzkill, right? Or or whatever, like, just like, would like, there are certainly people who are, going to like stick up for themselves, but and I think there are also people who can, like, you know get X carded or whatever, and just, continue forward without it, like, affecting their experience. But I think that for most of us, it's going to be like sort of getting used to these things, and learning to appreciate them in sort of a way. Like, even for myself, like, I've been X carded, like, it was like years ago, the last time, I think. But like, the first time I played Monster Hearts, I was X carded. So I was like, it's good that Monster Hearts was brought up, because this is actually like something that I have experienced. Like, I find the first edition, especially of Monster Hearts, to be like a really challenging. And this is sort of tying into like Sarah's desire to talk about like consent built in. Like, that turn someone on is really challenging to navigate with consent, for sure. Um, and yeah, I got X carded in that situation, because I was like, well, I turned you on. And it was like, the player didn't know how to react to that. Like, oh, how am I turned on? What am I doing here? And it was like, oh, wait, well, like, that player was like, I'm actually just not comfortable with the situation at all that we're in right now, so I'm going to X card it. And I was like, okay. And so then that, like, there was like some mental kerfuffle, and I'm actually really good friends with that player now. So it's not like it was the worst possible outcome. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting to consider, like, the normalization, the shared responsibility, and just sort of like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe we should take a little break, since we've got so many people AFK. Do we think that would be a good idea?
So I was actually gonna suggest, because I kind of wanted to keep these around an hour.
Ah,
Maybe we could try to, like, do final thoughts, and then I think this might be part one, if everyone wants to come back to this discussion, because I think there's a lot that we could get to here, and I don't know that we're going to be able to hit it all in one conversation. So I'm thinking maybe we can kind of like do a round of, do we have any final thoughts on the things we talked about today, and then sort of set up the things we'd like to focus on next time, if that's all right with everybody. Stars and wishes. Mostly just, did we hit anything that you don't feel we explored enough? Did we hit anything that you felt like we learned from? That kind of stuff. And then what you'd like to talk about next time. Because I definitely think this could be a series of discussions. And something we didn't hit, so I'll go first, I guess, in that respect, is something I think we didn't hit a lot is how to build the solutions to these problems into our play culture. And so I definitely like to talk more about how do we try to solve for some of these problems, because some of the things that came up were things like there's shame around being X'd. How do we adjust our perception of that, right? Something I love about the discussion around pronouns right now is that if you get someone's pronouns wrong, you're supposed to say thank you. And so when you're X, like maybe that's something we can do, right? Try to transition the expectation that if you're X'd, you're supposed to say thank you. Thank you for telling me that we've, reached a boundary. And so something like that, right? I'd love to explore that more and how we reincorporate that back into the play culture around X card and trying to remove the shame there. And something I think that was really interesting that we got to today was I still don't know where player agency should live. Like how much players should expect to have agency over their characters. Should it be total or complete agency over their character? Should it be should you come to the table sort of expecting to disclaim a little bit of authority over your character, as long as it doesn't trigger a trauma? So that's something I'd love to explore more too. But I'll pass it off. Whoever's ready to go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like player agency is definitely one of those things where it's like this is another sort of like relinquishing player agency is something that, like with other challenging parts of games, like that idea, I think Ben brought it up of going into like unsafe gaming intentionally, and how to navigate that. I think these are things that like we have to have those, like that practical implementation for how to do that. Like how do we go into it? How do we broadcast our intentions about these things? How do we make the space for the the trust and like getting that consent, I guess. Like that's definitely something I'm interested in. Like I'm interested in that, not just as coming to the table, but in the broader context of player culture. Like how does this get built into games, which I think is another thing Sarah was talking about earlier. Yeah, I mean, like I have a lot of thoughts about that, and I also am very eager to learn more about that. So, yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to whichever episode we talk about those sort of things. I mean, I think that like I could probably go on for way too long about like designing and I feel like that sometimes is hampering, where like discussions get derailed because it just goes into a design space. But I'm definitely interested in like what sort of like rituals like we can bring to the table. And like I had this thought earlier, like when you brought up the pronouns thing, Kurt, like it was like it sort of sounded like a PBTA move. Like when you get someone's pronouns wrong, say thank you. And just that idea of like okay, well, this is like one example of like, okay, you could ritualize this to help bring healthy play culture to the table, right? Like how else can we do that? Like let's talk about that. That I think that would be really good.
Yeah, I feel like we have fully explored this first bullet point. But the practical implementation of new, better safety tools, more safety tools, and then all this other stuff that we've got here, because I'm super interested in a lot of it.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything in particular to, like one bullet point to take away from today, but it's been a fantastic discussion and I appreciate all the great conversation about it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to talking more about all this stuff because it's so complicated and all of these things are kind of wrapped up together. So, I think that's why we didn't go down the list of bullet points that we have, right? The conversation is just going to take us where it goes. So yeah, looking forward to it.
I think the last thing for me, and I apologize for coming in late, but the one thing I have learned is that you just can't sleep on it, and the process is ongoing. It's always happening. I've unwrapped the incidents that have happened to me so many times in my brain, but like one of the contributing factors was that I slept on it because I thought that gauntlet play culture was supposedly so great that it couldn't occur there. Like I thought like everyone was on the same page and we all knew the tools, blah 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 blah. But nope, that's not enough. It's not enough that we all know the tools, and it's not enough that we all come from a good play culture or what we think is a good play culture. There's always work to be done on it. It just has to happen every single time. And that is the lesson that I need to take forward.
What I want to do is I actually want to thank anyone that shared like a personal story of like when this like when we haven't like met our own expectations of like what we are trying to accomplish with this, because that can feel super shitty. And so like I appreciate people being like frank about those kinds of things. Like that's really important to being able to understand like how can we like each as like players at our own tables like see to our own needs and help the other people at the table be able to see to their needs. So I think that's super important. The thing that I'm really interested in thinking about and hearing more about, like I come from a couple of like long-term I come from like one long-term face-to-face group right now, where like we are a group that as a function of the kind of content that we are playing and as a function of the like kinds of relationships that we have with each other, we haven't done any kind of like any of this like formalized or ritualized uh safety stuff. Like I think we all have a pretty good expectation of each other, but we are friends outside of the gaming table. Like I've made the reference that like I've helped these people move, which means that I actually love them because I fucking hate moving. But I don't know. I think what I'm interested in is like figuring out like what integration of these tools looks like as like as people enter and join like tables and communities. Like what does the I recognize we're talking about play culture and like what develops that play culture, but like what does that on ramp look like for someone that is totally outside of this space, maybe look like. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank everyone for joining and having this talk today. This was really good. I know there's going to be a lot of, hopefully we're going to come up with a lot of actionable stuff on what we did today. But I think sort of finding where we live in this space is a really good first step. And so thank you, everybody, for joining us and for sharing. And I cannot wait for next time. So I do, like I said, I want to try to keep these to around an hour. I will post in the Slack the next poll. I don't think it necessarily has to have the same crew every time, but I would love to have as many people as possible join the conversation. So if you didn't get to make it today and you'd like to be in on this, respond to the poll. Let us know. If I'm not posting times that are ever going to work for you, Australia, then let me know that you need specific times, because I'd love to get a broader range of influence. So thank you to everybody, and until next time, I will stop the recording.